Welcome back, guys, or if you're new to my channel, this is Automotive Anonymous, and that's the 2025 Toyota Tundra. But more specifically, it's a platinum trim level in a color that Toyota likes to call Celestial Silver Metallic, which in person I actually think it looks really sharp. There's a lot of metallic flake in the paint, and this is maybe even my favorite color of the all-new Tundra. So today I get to share the good, the bad, and the ugly of this recently redesigned third generation Toyota Tundra to help you guys at home decide if this might be the right full-size truck for you. So you can expect to see a walk around. All the specs, initial driving impressions, 0 to 60 on GPS, and then my final thoughts, and huge thanks to the Twin Falls Subaru for letting me borrow this slightly used example for today. They sell below MSRP, they ship all over the country, and with that said, let's dive right into this review. And if you like Toyota, the third generation Tundra, or my video, please consider liking my video. That small act of kindness, it really goes a long way. It means a lot to me, and it helps me know you want to watch more stuff like this, while helping you by having YouTube choose to show you more stuff like this that you maybe didn't know existed. Thank you. But if you're new to the Toyota Tundra, you really need to know that that nameplate first came out back in the year 2000. It replaced the T100, which was actually the first full-size pickup truck out of any Japanese automaker. So when the Tundra came rolling out of the assembly lines in 2000, it was the second full-size truck out of any Japanese automaker, but these are only sold in the US and Canada. They're actually homegrown, or they're assembled in Texas and Indiana, which makes this as American as any full-size truck, if we're being honest, because over half the parts come from American automakers. So it actually has more US assembly and parts than a lot of the American trucks, believe it or not. This and the Cybertruck apparently are actually the most American, which is kind of strange, kind of crazy to think, but it's not necessarily the same workhorse that the American trucks are. The Ford F-150, the best-selling vehicle of all time, or at least for trucks, that sells sometimes up to 750,000 units every single year. The Tundra, it might only sell about 100,000 or maybe a little bit more every single year. So the sales numbers don't match what the other full-size trucks are, but it still has a few cool things that this offers. This is the first top safety pick of any full-size truck for this new third generation that started in 2022. And as you guys can see right here, it still has the vertical sliding window, which is something that I think is pretty neat. The pricing and the powertrain options on this Tundra are also pretty interesting, as are many of the full-size trucks these days. There's a variety. This one is not the hybrid, so it has a twin-turbo V6 that I'll show you more under the hood, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it starts at about $40,000 for the cheapest version of the 9 hybrid. This Platinum, though, is currently the 4th highest trim level, but there's 8 trim levels, so it's actually dab smack in the middle. And it starts at a little bit over $60,000, and then with a few extra goodies and options, it might be closer to $70,000, so that's not cheap for a full-size truck. Furthermore, the hybrids, the cheapest trim level of that, starts at $57,000. So you can see it's not very difficult to get a Tundra into the $70,000 ballpark, which is crazy. That still feels astronomical for me for a full-size truck, but I guess that's just where we are right now and what the market is. And all I can say is I think this is a pretty good looking full-size truck. You're gonna see how it drives in a few minutes and why I actually prefer this compared to a lot of the other full-size trucks. But it's not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. And unfortunately, it's not perfect either, and it might not yet have the reliability that the 5.7 Tundra had, because over 1,000 of these so far out of several 100,000 being on the roads, they've had engine failures from debris getting into the oil from a manufacturing process that basically starves the bearings and the rods of oil, and your engine goes out. Toyota has actually issued a recall where they're going to replace 100,000 engines, and if you can imagine each engine costs between $10,000 to $20,000, I don't want to see the bill that Toyota's paying to replace their engines, but thankfully they are. But one of the downsides of that is I'm not sure how resale value is on these. Some of you guys on the forums have reported having huge losses trying to get out of yours that need an engine replacement. And others of you have mentioned that they actually are doing pretty good and you're getting a pretty fair deal for yours for being a used truck. So I don't want to discourage anyone from having this because Toyota is trying to make it right. And in general, if this platform is going to be around for the next decade, I'd imagine that this twin-turbo V6 engine is going to be pretty reliable in the end. But what are your thoughts? Comment them below. And what are your experiences if you are currently a Tundra owner? Are you worried about the engine failure? Are you not? Some people are, some people aren't, and I really want to hear your thoughts on that. But overall, this is not a small truck by any stretch of the imagination. I just backed it up to the curb, and you can see it takes the whole spot. That's because depending on bed and cab length, these are about 19 to 20 feet long, which is basically identical to the Fords and the Chevys. It's a little bit over 6.5 feet wide, about 6.5 feet tall, and then depending on your options and if it's the hybrid or not, it's going to weigh 51 to 5,800 pounds. So definitely not nearly as much as a diesel, but still quite a bit more than the midsize truck, and you can feel that weight when you're driving it. This one specifically, being the Platinum, has a payload capacity of 1,300 pounds. So between the cabin and the bed, you can only hold 1,300 pounds before you're breaking the limits in the law, at least as far as this truck is concerned. It can tow about 8,000 to 12,000 pounds depending on which trim level you get. Usually the SR is the lower one with a less powerful engine, getting about 8,000 pounds, and then an SR5 or the most loaded one that doesn't have more of a suspension for off-roading, like this or the TRD off-road or the Pro. Those are going to be towing a little bit higher on the 12,000 pounds. And then they have 8.5 to 9.5 inches of ground clearance. I actually couldn't find the final drive ratio numbers online, so if you guys know that, please comment below. It can do a full circle in about 50 feet, and it's a joy to drive. The last few things to mention on here is the gas door is thankfully located on the driver's side, making it convenient to access, but it doesn't lock. So you have to be careful that the bums don't try to siphon any of your either 22 or 32 gallons of fuel, depending on which gas tank you have. And then this being the non-hybrid, it's rated for about 17 in the city, about 22 on the highway. So you could get up to about 700 miles of range in this specific pickup truck. It has a Bridgestone tire, 20-inch wheel, and it's a 265/60/20. So you still get quite a bit of sidewall, although I personally wish you only had an 18-inch wheel to have even more sidewall, another inch on each side. But with that big rotor, you probably could drop it down to about an 18, but I do understand why they have to have such big wheels on such big brake setups for modern trucks. And then this is your key. Let's see if we can get it to remote start. Well, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I've tried the 3 lock and hold on the third one several times, and this has not worked yet. It actually worked when I first got the keys and took this truck out. I did it from halfway across the parking lot. But for whatever reason, it's not working right now, so maybe the system's temperamental, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but comment your thoughts and opinions below. Otherwise, this Platinum does have remote start, it just doesn't seem to be working the same way that I was able to start it last time. Otherwise, you can leave your keys in the pocket because you do have proximity key features to lock and the mirrors fold in, but it is kind of slow compared to some other makes. Anyways, the door panel, it's all soft touch materials. There's a little bit of cheap plastic right here, but at least we know that Toyota cheap plastic, you know, it ages really well. It doesn't show a lot of damage. And then you have soft touch materials and some blue Hobby Lobby stitching in the places that you need it. You can have the upper tray, memory seats, and then a ton of storage for snacks and bottles and other stuff right there with a speaker that's unnamed. Otherwise, running board along the whole thing, all other Tundra mats, I strongly recommend, or I highly recommend you upgrade these with a better brand because they really don't cover that much and they kind of fold and age poorly. Otherwise, you have rubberized pedals, hood release. These are all the options on this current one. You have electronic tilt and telescope, you have lighting stock, you have ventilation, and then this is your ventilated heated seat that actually can do quite a few things. And then you have the huge pano moonroof up top. Sitting inside here is actually a pretty nice place to be. The horn, pretty high pitched, but very loud. Otherwise, it's easy to find a comfortable position. Everything is within reach. You have voice and volume controls on the left, adaptive cruise on the right, push button start. Let's listen to that engine fire up. Yeah, a little bit of a graphic on this one. I don't see a heads-up display, more speaker and ventilation, some storage with a 12-volt right there. This is your reverse mirror or your reverse camera, whichever way you prefer it. Otherwise, you have physical ventilation, USB, which I'm kind of surprised it's a B and not a C type. Otherwise, I like that you have all physical buttons, controls. You can have the cameras on, the 360 degree. It's pretty cool. Wireless charger, some extra storage. It's angled down, so your phone's not going to fly out at you. You have a tuck away, smallish sized cup holder right there. You can go through your drive modes right here. Currently, I'm going to leave it in sport for our driving, 4 high, 4 low, no locking diff on this one. And then a few different ways to kind of access what you have for the center console. So if you choose to not have the middle seat, you actually get quite a bit of stuff. You even have what looks like a coin holder right there and a few more USBs. So not too bad. Otherwise, you can change the sliding glass right there. It works pretty quick. I seriously love driving with that open. I just love the fresh air, other than today being very hazy, lots of fires and smoke in the area, but still such a fun drive. And then you can do the sunshade and move the actual first half of the glass of the panoramic moonroof. And with that said, the screen really doesn't have a lot that I personally care to talk about. It's pretty basic. It does not need to be this big, but this is what it is. And with that said, let's turn it off and we'll hop in the back. Now the back of the Tundra, especially this full-size 4-door truck, it's absolutely huge. Basically, you have the same door panel built by the same interior engineers as the front, so nothing really stands out or surprises me, other than the fact that you even have the upper tray. I love that. You also have an additional sunshade beyond the factory window tint, which is probably around 25%. And then this is your massive back seat. You could lay down in here. You can also lift it up and have a ton of extra storage, but if you do opt for the hybrid, you lose this, which is unfortunate. So at 5'11", grabbing the B-pillar handle, I have so much room in front of my knees. This is a pretty good time. I'd love to ride in here and be chauffeured across the country. Otherwise, cup holders, which are even bigger than the front, it looks like. Ventilation, heat and ventilation, or cooled seats and heated. Some plugins, a 12-volt, and a center armrest. So this Platinum, for only being halfway through the trim levels, it's freaking awesome. This is a really nice place to be. And although I am going to recommend, if you don't use the back seat, if you don't use the bed, you do not need a full-size truck. You know, drive something more reasonable. But if you do need this, the Tundra is actually built really well. And at 5'11", the only thing I'm missing is just a little bit more headroom. But you can see there's kind of a cutout for each outboard seat, just not the middle seat. So they miss out a little bit. Have your shorter passengers right here. But otherwise, let's hop out and I'll show you the bed. I personally really like the rear end of the Tundra. This does look kind of silly, kind of off a little bit if you really look too closely at it, kind of like a spoiler almost. But from a distance, it looks really good. And if you don't think about it just being one more trim piece that will hopefully never fall off, it actually looks kind of good. It's kind of interesting that Toyota, you no longer have the locky tailgate. It's just the electronic button right there, not a physical mechanical release. But that probably makes sense because you have the lower button right there, and you can also lower it on your remote. The unfortunate part of this one is it's going to lower, which hopefully is just a mechanical release and hopefully not electronic. But you can hear something electronic trigger right there, and it doesn't have the motor to pull it back up, which personally, I don't even like the multi-flex tailgates and all the silly electronic stuff because it's just one more thing to go wrong. And if you're buying a truck, especially a truck that's not the highest payload and the highest workhorse type of truck, you don't need more things to go wrong. Toyotas are supposed to be reliable. So you have some tie downs on each corner. You have the cleat slide system, like what I used to have on my Tacomas. You have some LED lighting, you have your power outlet, and thankfully the tailgate is not super heavy. And I really like just the whole cosmetic exterior design of this. You have the hitch and the receiver, the pins right there, the plug-ins, and some pretty bright backup lights as well. But if you're the lucky duck that gets to ride passenger in the Platinum Tundra, what do you get to experience? Well, the door panel basically looks the same as the driver's side. Huge door panel, all the same things. You even have all the same controls basically, minus just one of the sliding features. And then the backpack's having a good time enjoying the ventilated seats. This one does not have storage above the glove box, which is a shame. But it is kind of like a leather wrap with more Hobby Lobby stitching and no transmission tunnel storage either. It is locking from the key hidden in the remote. I don't see any USBs or 12 volts or anything in here, but it's, actually we're gonna be honest, it's kind of small for a full-size truck. Anyways, let's come around to the front. I'll pop the hood for you guys and I'll show you what the twin turbo 3.4 liter V6 engine looks like. Under the hood, you have a twin turbo V6 engine. This one without the hybrid system, without all the orange wires and components, it makes about 389 horsepower at 5,000 RPM, so you do have to rev it out pretty good, and about 489 foot-pound-feet of torque, and that comes on as low as 2,000 RPM. If you do opt for the hybrid, you get about 50 more peak horsepower and about 100 more peak torque, and it sounds like those are only a couple tenths of a second faster. So this engine, for being turboed, not hybridized, it actually is pretty cool. And then under the hood, you'll notice you have the battery on the passenger side. You have a relay or a fuse box on each side. You have all of your reservoirs kind of scattered throughout the oil dipstick. And then this actually has one turbo on each bank of the exhaust. So 3 cylinders goes into each turbo. So you have independent air filters. And then the turbo is just kind of hidden right here. If you guys can see that down there, kind of tucked away, kind of gets pretty low because there is quite a bit under the hood of this, especially when, again, this is a top safety pick plus, so you have a lot of extra length in front of it for crumple zone to protect you so that energy doesn't get transversed into the cabin, which is good, but it means that there's not as much room under the hood to work on this like an old school engine, which I think is a fair trade-off, especially because once these get all their issues figured out, they're going to be pretty reliable, and a lot of people have already even put up to 100,000 miles on theirs reliably. So there's a few bad apples, but overall, this powertrain actually does feel a lot better than the old V8 if we're being honest. So let's drop the hood and I'll show you what I mean. Initial driving impressions of the brand new 3rd generation Tundra. A little bit of wheel spin. Traction is off. It is in sport mode right now, and then 2-wheel drive high. So just driving it through the country right now, visibility is actually surprisingly good. Remember, this is a top safety pick plus. I currently have the panoramic sunshade moved out of the way and then the rear window drop down because that's part of the reason why you buy a Tundra. it's for that vertical window. I seriously really like the interior of this. Not necessarily super fond of the ginormous screen, especially for how little information it actually has on there, but I love that everything is physical dials. The heated seats and the steering wheel, I've had them on for probably at least 10 minutes at this point, and they're actually pretty warm. The heated steering wheel, it could be a little bit warmer, but the seats are right where I like them to be. And overall, this is just a pretty good truck. You can hear a lot more wind noise when you do have the window down, but personally, you can feel the fresh air coming into the cabin, and I think that's absolutely worth it. Otherwise, it's a really nice, comfortable vehicle to drive. But if you don't need a truck for truck stuff, I highly recommend you maybe consider a Tacoma or some other smaller vehicles, because this thing still does not handle very good on corners. I don't think it has as much body roll as some of the Chevys and Fords I've driven, but it still feels like a ginormous truck, and with a 6.5 foot bed and a full size living room amount of space back here, you know, it is a big vehicle if you're just going to drive it unloaded like I am. I'm also a little bit disappointed that the payload is only about 1,300 pounds. So usually when you have a lower payload, that means that the suspension is more off-road focused and a little bit nicer riding on the streets. And personally, I would say that this is a pretty nice riding vehicle. But overall, everything is well laid out, ergonomically pleasing, and especially the fact that this has huge side mirrors, really good visibility. Or if you want to use the camera, which personally, I've driven a number of vehicles with that, I'm still kind of tripped out by it. It's gonna take some time to get used to, I think, but overall, the Tundra is a pretty cool option. There's a little bit of a bump right here. Handled it pretty well because the wheelbase on this thing is so long. So overall, it rides well. The seats don't have a ton of bolstering, so don't go around corners fast. Plus, the physics of the truck won't allow that very smoothly anyways. The speakers sound pretty good in this Platinum. It's not super windy out, so it's kind of hard to tell some of the wind and road noise, plus tire noise. Ooh, this definitely kicks up a lot of rocks because of the torque that it has low end with those turbos, but the rocks and the road noise from the tires just going down regular country roads, really not that bad. And for being a twin turbo V6, I actually think this one sounds pretty good. But with that said, let's get to 0 to 60. 0 to 60 in the Tundra. Keep in mind, density altitude is 5,000 feet, so even though this is twin turbo, the turbos are still compressing less oxygen dense air, so it could be down in power up to about 10%, maybe 7 or 8% realistically, but just know it is down on power. And then I'm gonna do a brake rev, 4-wheel drive, high, traction off, and we are in sport mode. Let's see what it can do. Really hard launch. Not too bad. And then true 0 to 60 came in at 6.45, a little bit faster with that rollout. That's really not bad, given the fact that this is a full-size truck. My final thoughts of the third generation Toyota Tundra, specifically how this Platinum non-hybrid one drove and felt and did all the things. I really like it. I personally follow the 2022 Plus Tundra forum because I really like these. I love how they look. I love that the Tacomas are now styled after these, and I just think they look a lot better than the bloated, rounded out second generation Tundras. But despite having a few issues that I think Toyota is going to have well sorted out within the next year or two, I do think that this is a pretty good vehicle. Half the reason I say that is because of it being a top safety pick. If it protects you and your family, keeps you from being very injured in an accident, especially from a distracted driver crashing into you, it was worth it. Having the vertical rear view window, I think that's the other half of the reason. Otherwise, it's just a good vehicle. It does drive like a truck, but kind of a little bit better than a lot of the other trucks I've driven, even like the Rally Sport truck or the Sport F-150s. I just like this one, but also maybe I'm Toyota biased because even though I currently don't own a Toyota, because I'm kind of upset about the value that I think they are now. Whereas a full-size truck should not cost 70 grand, especially a gasser with a V6, but that's just my own opinion. So currently I don't own Toyotas, but I have in the past. I've owned a supercharged F2 Cruiser and 2 Tacomas that I bought new. So I do have a soft spot in my heart for these, but you buy them because they're reliable. You buy them because they're sort of a lifestyle vehicle, not because it's the highest payload, best work truck on the road, but because it speaks to your heart. You know it's going to be reliable, and you know it's going to keep its value quite well. And where this is only the third year of the current generation Tundra, there's a lot to be seen on how these do, how they hold up, and how the resale value is in the long run. And with that said, I always recommend you test drive the competition. Check out all the trucks before you drop your hard-earned money on one of these. But personally, it did exceed my expectations, and my expectations were fairly high to begin with. And I think this is a really cool truck and one that I'm very excited that I got to bring to you guys. And with that said, I wish you guys the best. Like this video if you got anything out of it. Comment your thoughts and opinions below. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I hope to see you again on the next one. See you guys.